There are some major differences, some major contrasts between our reading from Romans today and our reading from Matthew. And they go beyond the tongue-twisting aspect of that Romans reading and the straightforwardness of the Matthew one. You see, in Romans, Paul is lamenting. Paul is lamenting that no matter how hard he tries, no matter how much he works to do good, he does evil instead. No matter how much he wills to do what God wills, he does the opposite very often. It's a woe is me kind of text. And in fact, he said, "Wretched man that I am," at one point. It's all about what he is incapable of doing and what he wishes to do. It's all about the work that he wants to do. But then we get to the Matthew text and Jesus says, "Come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Rest. That's such an interesting and challenging concept, isn't it? Rest. We hear about it, and sometimes it seems like rest is something that is impossible to get. But Jesus says, "I will bring you rest." We live in a world and in a culture where your work is your worth. How often when you meet someone for the first time is one of the first questions they ask, "What do you do?" Or perhaps, "What did you do?" Because your work is your worth. What you do or what you did matters and tells other people how important and how good you are. This concept, this feeling, builds up expectations. So the outside world has expectations of what we will do, and then they become our own expectations of ourselves. And it seems like there is always more work to be done. There's always something else to do. There's more and more and more that we need to accomplish. And the expectations get greater, and the rest disappears. Our work is our worth. And that feeling spills over even into our faith life. So that we, with Paul, think to ourselves, what do I need to do? What work must I accomplish to eradicate my own sinfulness, to get righteousness, to make myself good and worthy of God? I've had this happen to myself, and it happened just last week. Our stuff showed up at our new house. And the boxes started coming off the truck, and as soon as the boxes were off the truck, I was into the boxes trying to put stuff away. I worked all day, hours, putting stuff away, trying to get as much of it put away as possible while Wes was home to help out. And by about 10 o'clock, Wes was begging me to go to sleep, to rest. For there was far too much to do in one day, and no matter how hard I tried, no matter how fast I worked, it was not going to get done. But what we all needed was some rest, some sleep, some time not spent worrying about how much was left to do, but just resting. It's easy to get caught up in the work that needs to get done and forget how important it is to rest. Now, Jesus speaks these words not directly to us, but to a crowd gathered in first century Palestine, a different time and a different place. It's to these people that he says, "Come to me and I will give you rest." And they lived in a society, in a culture where their work was their worth. Sometimes we like to think that we are far removed from that time and place, but in some ways, very little has changed. It mattered what you did in that time just as it matters now. Many people who were gathered there were probably working every single day just to get enough food for their families. Those who were unable to work were looked down upon. They had to beg for what they needed for daily life, and they were seen as less than everyone else. So Jesus speaks these words to those who also think it matters what I do. And in their faith lives, this happened as well. When they sinned, they would go and make an offering to try to make themselves right with God. When they went astray, when they did something wrong, there was work to be done to fix it. And not just the work of apologizing or asking for forgiveness or righting the wrong, but the work of trying to make oneself right with God. Their work was their worth. And Jesus says, "Come to me, and I will bring you rest." Now, some of what he says might be a little bit hard for us to understand, because he talks about yokes and burdens, and I don't know that all of us understand yokes and burdens very much. You see, he's speaking to an agrarian society, so they would know what a yoke was. They would know that it was placed across the shoulders of an animal. And that animal could then be attached to a plow or a cart or some other thing that they could pull. But the yoke mattered deeply. If the yoke was too big or too small, if it didn't fit the shoulders of that animal just right, it didn't matter how light the burden was. The animal would be bent over. The animal would be in pain, and the work would seem impossible. The wrong yoke changed the way the work went, and it was no help to anyone. So when Jesus speaks to these people and says, "My yoke is easy," they know. They know that what he is saying is, my yoke fits right. My yoke fits correctly, and because of that, any burden that you carry is made easier to carry as a result. It may not be one that makes your life easy, but the burden, the yoke that I bring are easy and light, and they fit correctly. That's why Jesus can say, "I will bring you rest." All too often we are wearing the wrong yoke. Like Paul, we put on the yoke of sin and shame. We put on the yoke of death and pain, and we are bent over by the weight of what we are trying to carry. We're carrying the wrong yoke. We're pulling the wrong burden, for these are not easy or light, but far too much for us to handle. So when Jesus says, "Come to me and I will give you rest," he's talking about taking off that yoke of sin and giving it to the one who willingly takes it, Christ himself. When he says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," he is talking about the yoke of grace and forgiveness and mercy, the burden of forgiving as we have been forgiven, loving as we have been loved, and living in service to one another. It's not necessarily always easy, but when we bear it with the yoke of grace, it is far easier than with the yoke of sin. So Jesus calls, "Come, and you will find rest." And it is this promise. It is what Christ has done for us and the rest to which Christ calls us, that Paul ends this portion of Romans by saying, "Thanks be to God for Christ Jesus. For his yoke is easy. His burden is light. Come and rest in him."